We have a few minutes, right, Katie?
Sorry?
We have a few minutes, correct?
We do, yep. So folks are just joining, kind of trickling in. I can see Chuck and Julia on there too, and our Anna. Hey guys. And we will just give it a few more minutes, but start really right on the hour.
Okay, I will be right back.
Okay. All right. My clock has hit 1,300 hours. So we are gonna kick it off, and we'll just be so glad to have folks join as they are able. I know it's over the lunch hour. So let me just start by saying welcome. We are just really so glad you're here. And I know there's 1,000 webinars you can go to and 1,000 other ways that you can use your time. And so we just truly are appreciative that you are spending the next hour with us. So I just want to say thank you, thank you, thank you. On behalf of Team Aaliyah, we welcome you to this space, and we're just pleased as punch to have some really amazing guest speakers to share their wisdom with you all. So thank you all for being here. I just wanted to draw attention to actually the photo on our screen. And as we talk about big things like systems change, and as we focus and talk about what that looks like in systems, I just never want us to lose sight of the fact that what we're here to do is to help more kids and more families stay safely together. And so more babies can stay with their grannies, and more kiddos can stay safely with their people. So I just wanted to say that we chose this picture really specifically to always remind us that that's what we're here for, is that sense of uninterrupted sense of belonging that we are working towards for every kid in all of our jurisdictions. I am Katie Miller. I'm the Chief Innovation Officer at Aaliyah. We also have Anna Kaitonen-Kaufman here, give a little wave. So Anna is a huge support and part of this work, and will be helping to make sure that all of the questions and comments in the chat are brought forth. And so we're all in this together. We've got some Team Aaliyah folks on here. So we will just jump in. I want to start by offering, like, putting us a bit in context in a bigger picture, and then for a bit of grounding as a part of Aaliyah's work in our deep desire and value and our aspiration to become an anti-racist organization and build an anti-racist culture, we would like to honor the people whose land that Aaliyah inhabits. In our efforts to build a pathway of truth and reconciliation, we believe it is our responsibility to honor Indigenous people by acknowledging the sacred and unceded land that we inhabit that was stolen. Aaliyah is in St. Paul, Minnesota, and resides on the land that belongs to the first peoples of the Dakota. There are 11 federally recognized tribes in Minnesota, and we ask you to join us in our effort to become educated about the people on whose land we and you reside, and recognize the history that brought us here today. We celebrate the resiliency and respect the sovereignty of First Nations Indigenous people as they continue to show their strength in their ways of living in connection with the land and water. And we pay our respects to elders past and present and emerging. And we acknowledge that certainly at Aaliyah have a lot of room to grow in our expression of our values, and we know that it can't stop at simply acknowledging that. To help to turn our acknowledgement into action and into justice work, there are some resources that we'd like to share. Maybe Anna could put those in the chat. To help us to do better research and gain a deeper understanding of the history of what brought us here and the land that we reside. Also, in an effort to build an anti-racist culture with all of you, we want to do some container setting, and as a practice, we invite and welcome you all to compassionately and lovingly call us in when we say or state something that seems contrary to that value of anti-racism. And we offer that we hope to respectfully do that as well. So if we say something that doesn't sit right, we welcome feedback. We're here to learn from each other. So that all said, we want to say thank you again for being here. I want to just offer just an idea of how we'll spend our time together today. I'm just going to talk a few minutes about who we are at Aaliyah. If you're new to Aaliyah, or if you're new to the effort of the Aaliyah Innovation Cohort, so I'll talk about some background and tee up our speakers a bit. We have Chuck Price here to talk about change and systems transformation and well-being from a leader perspective, and we also have Julia Jensen, who will talk from a unique perspective of a manager level of having to sort of operationalize this and through a lens of well-being. And we have our own, Aaliyah's own, Tanya Anderson, who will offer her insights from all of her experience on how we can focus on culture as an approach to well-being. And we'll leave some time for questions and answers at the end, and then do a wrap up. Feel free, you don't have to hold your questions to the end by any means. Like I said, we will certainly be attentive to tending to the chat. And if you just are dying to ask something, just unmute yourself and just say. So a bit about who we are. We are an organization called Aaliyah. We are a Minnesota-based nonprofit, and although we do work in many, many states across the country, and we really operate our work and our approach to systems change and child welfare from a know better, do better, be better approach. So what that looks like is that we support and convene innovators in public, mostly public, some private child welfare agencies to transform the child welfare system. And again, I want to highlight this last piece here is that we have set out to obsolete child welfare as we know it today by creating and supporting new approaches. Again, the key here is to keeping youth safely with, not from, their families. So that's the approach that we take. We have expertise in areas like permanency, workforce resilience and well-being, leadership coaching and strategy, and we offer that excuse me, through consultation and coaching and workshops and training and ongoing projects. So this is the scope of our work. You can find lots more information on our website, and we want to just describe one of the initiatives that we helped to facilitate and got to be part of, and that is the ALIA Unsystem Innovation Cohort. So in 2017, we hosted a 3.5-day design event and invited 150 designers from all across the country with all different perspectives and engagements in the child welfare system as paid people or people who have experienced that in their personal life. And often those two folks were the same. And we asked this question: how might we design a better child welfare system? So I'm just going to give you a real quick punchline to that whole event. And what we learned was that we're reminded of was that the perfect child welfare system already exists. So in fact, we do not need to create a whole new system. So that's encouraging because every child already lives in and exists in a system, and that's their family. And so we then changed our focus and our thoughts around that to say, no, we don't have to rebuild anything. What we need to do, where our efforts need to be focused, is to help children and families create and maintain the connections that already exist. So to that end, we look at it this way, that the traditional child welfare system, or perhaps the current child welfare system, really takes approaches that often undermine that family system. So there's blame and shame and punishment. And what we are moving towards is an unsystem approach that builds family well-being and builds connection. And as you'll see on the screen here, puts the whole family at the center, that we focus on resilience and joy and well-being and health, and offer consistent supportive services that are delivered locally. And we offer family-driven, culturally specific support. So that's really our goal. Out of that design event that I mentioned came some guiding principles. And so we call these really our core unsystem guiding principles. So you'll see that some signals of an unsystem would be protecting relational connections as sacred, and committing to intergenerational well-being, nurturing the capacity for joy. We truly believe that to provide support and to gain support can be a joyous activity and does not have to be a traumatic relationship. And we also talk about insisting on racial equity and radical inclusion, trusting the wisdom of children and families to design their own future, and then the risk of and the commitment to sharing power. And above all, if we don't know what to do, we consistently ask ourselves, what would the loving thing be? So it's do what love would do. So we had these guiding principles, and how do we bring these to life? So enter the Unsystem Innovation Cohort. Our plan was to, at ALIA, take a guiding principle at a time and sort of work it in a jurisdiction, see how that might look, how might you approach that, developing one particular guiding principle. And we got very clear feedback from some leaders that we work with that said, please don't take this piece by piece, let's just do it. So we found a group of really brave leaders and some lived experience and professional guides that have that inserted some amazing insights and guidance along the way. And these are the folks in front of you on the screen. This is the ALIA Unsystem Innovation Cohort. So we met for 3 years from 2018 to 2021. And I will let you visit the website and read the series of 3 case studies that describe the work in more detail, what they actually did, lots about what we learned, and some of the outcomes that we were able to achieve. And today, when we were thinking about and imagining, thanks Anna, the link is in the chat. When we were imagining, we wanted to share so many of the things that we learned over 3 years. So we developed this series of webinars. Of course, today is the first of 4. We were brainstorming what topics we would want to bring to you. And of the 5 that really elevated in our first year, one that is absolutely pervasive that we kept going back to was this idea and efforts and investment in well-being and resilience. So our something that arose in every place from every person was prepare and take care of yourself and your team. So today, with our next 45 minutes, Chuck and Julia and Tanya will talk about specific ways and specific parts of the organization of developing workforce resilience in your teams and in yourself. So first up, I want to introduce Chuck Price, who is the former Director of Human Services in Waupaca County in Wisconsin, and is the current owner of Blue Collar Consulting. So Chuck has just a ton of wisdom to add to us. So I will toss it to you, Chuck.
Great. Thank you, Katie. Anna, am I able to share my screen at all?
Yep. So do you see the little share screen
Oh, yeah, there we go.
icon?
Right.
Then you should be able to pull up your PowerPoint. Perfect.
All right. Let's see if that's... All right. Well, thanks again, Katie. Like she said, I'm Chuck Price, and today I'm beaming in from what looks like the winter wonderland of central Wisconsin, here in beaming in from Wisconsin Rapids. I've been a Health and Human Services Director in the Wisconsin County system for probably 13 plus years or more, with the last of those 8 years being in Waupaca County, where we certainly spent a lot of time working with the folks at Amelia, and all the staff there. And so we were involved in the innovation cohort, which Katie mentioned, and I'll be speaking kind of from that leader perspective of what was needed in terms of support for our leadership team and for the agency as a whole. And I probably won't, I'll try not to get into the weeds and things like that, but maybe speak in some concepts about what leaders should be thinking about in terms of supporting the agency to be able to think about things differently, creatively, the ability to reimagine. And as I've kind of gone into this new world of consulting with blue collar consulting, that's the piece that I'm hoping to be able to do with leaders and organizations, is to help support them through change, help normalize change, help support them and their staff really to be a thriving environment where creativity and innovation can thrive, and we can, then transfer all of those fun things onto the folks that we serve, children and families. As I've been thinking about all the work that we put in when we were in Waupaca with our leadership team and with our staff, we did a lot of leadership development, a lot of professional development with our leadership team to build, trust among ourselves and relationships among ourselves so that we could do the good work. And we put in a lot of work with our staff around workforce well-being. And so these concepts about support and self-care and resiliency and those things I think are really important. And I think as I've thought about it even more, I think it's even bigger. And I think I was talking with Katie and Anna about this even just yesterday. It's like this notion of it's one thing to go to groups and committees and meetings and all these things to get more information, but I think there's this bigger thing that starts to happen, and so some of the concepts to keep thinking about today kind of led me to this. And some of you may have seen this presentation a little bit last week too, when I talked with the Wisconsin County Human Service Association and the directors there. But this notion of being the calm in the storm. And I think we've all heard about this or been told this, like leaders should be the calm in the storm. Like when things are out of control, a leader should, kind of be the calm. And I think sometimes that's easier said than done. But I think this picture for me has always just kind of stood out. This is one of my favorite places in the world. This is a lighthouse up in Grand Marais, Minnesota, up the north shore of Lake Superior. And as you can see, obviously the waves crashing around, and the ice is starting to form. And that lighthouse is just the calm, right? And it's just there, it's steady. Everybody knows it's there. The beacon keeps turning, just steady as can be. And it's just there. And that's the calm in the storm. But then if you take like this closer look at the lighthouse, you can kind of see some rust and maybe some decay on that lighthouse, the ice buildup and things like that. So it's not like the lighthouse doesn't take some punishment, take some beating in these waves that are coming in and things like that. And there's some real parallels there to being a leader as well. So when those waves are coming and you're taking the hits and things like that, it's not like it doesn't affect us. And so we have to find ways to make sure that we're taking care of ourselves so we can take care of others. We all know those pieces. And so just think about this, when we go to visit Grand Marais, it's nice and calm. You can actually walk out onto there and walk all the way out to the lighthouse. And so when that calm comes, that ability to repair and restore and come back, and be ready for that next storm, that next set of waves. So just keep this in mind, this notion of calm in the storm and this ability to be calm. Because it folds over into this quote as well. In a leadership role, you impact the emotion of the group. Your emotions color the emotions of the people in your span of care. And so leaders are the barometer for the agency. And I think we saw that a lot in our department. But it's like, if you're cycling and circling out of control, that blends right over into your staff, and they'll pick up on that. And it's the same thing. It's now the whole agency is kind of in chaos, and you kind of get into survival brain. And so on the flip side, if you're calm and kind of just steady, then that also reflects back into the staff as well. And they're, might still be a little, chaotic, but it's like there's much more calm going on. And so I should also mention, as we kind of dive into this, we've got about 3 or 4 hours of content here that we're going to jam into about 15 minutes. And so talk about chaos and crisis, we'll just kind of cruise through. So there's this parallel process that I think has to happen. It's the organization and me as a leader, us as leaders, what we need to be able to do for the organization to remain calm and be able to be kind of in rational brain is the same we need to do for ourselves as leaders. And so working on ourselves to work on the organization so that then we can provide this service to those who need us the most, those seeking service from us. So this parallel process, like what do we need in the agency? There's a need for safety, so this safe harbor, so to speak. And so in order to get there, we need rhythm and predictability. And when we talk about, like a trauma-informed approach, and we know about brain science and all those things that we're learning, it's about developing rhythm, predictability, so that we can get to safety. And so this notion of rhythm, to get to being regulated and get into rational brain. So rhythm, if you think about it from an organizational standpoint, simple piece would be like, as a staff member or as a leader, I know I've got a unit meeting on Monday. I've got my individual supervision on Wednesday. I've got an all staff meeting coming up. And so there's like this, you can kind of see this bit of a rhythm in how does the day go? What does it feel like when I walk through the door? Those types of rhythmic pieces. And then the predictability, if I'm going to these meetings, is there an agenda? What are we going to be talking about? I know what to expect of myself and what are we going to be talking about there. Predictability pieces of when I approach my supervisor, how do I get reacted to? When I approach the director, what does that feel like? When I make a mistake, when I have success, what do those feel like? And so as we get this rhythm and predictability, that blends into trust. And we need to have trust at super high levels in the work that we're all doing. And so, if we've got staff and our other leaders are out in meetings with school officials, they're going to court, they're meeting with lawyers, judges, district attorneys, they're going out and doing investigations with law enforcement, assessments with law enforcement. And so there's this huge, big need for trust, obviously. And so this rhythm, predictability, safety leads to trust and the connectedness. And so I think this is something we have to keep in mind when we're talking about our agencies and developing this calm in the storm. And you might say, like, that's the same slide that we just saw for the organization, and you're exactly right. Because for us as leaders and as humans, we need that same thing. And so we not only need that safety, but we need to be able to provide that safety. We need to be able to provide that predictability for our organizations and that rhythm, so that we can have that trusting environment. So just know, organization, leaders, we all need to be doing the same thing. And we did this all through a trauma-informed lens, and all the work that we had done with Aaliyah was really through trauma-informed principles and lenses. And why that's important when we're talking about the need for safety and knowing, this notion of underlying trauma. If you use the universal precaution kind of lingo, is we know everyone coming through our door, or majority of the folks coming through our door for service, have probably experienced adversities or traumas. We know probably our staff, similar. I think when we looked, it was like 32% of our staff reported having 4 or more ACEs. And so there's this need for a trauma-informed approach, not only for those that we serve, but those internally, our staff as well, including ourselves. And if we don't kind of address those things, we continue to be dysregulated, we know that we can't function if we're kind of in dysregulated brain. We talk about this with our youth and family that we work with, trying to get them to regulated so that we can have kind of clear thinking, critical thinking. And so we know that when we're dysregulated, the rational brain shuts off, that when in stress, we regress. And so we go back to what we know, what's comfortable, and might be the old way, even though we know that some of those outcomes and data doesn't support that old way. It's easier. It's where our survival brain goes to, versus being able to be calm, rational, and move through to the next step. So that need for safety, those same things we just talked about in the previous slides: need for safety, trust, and connection inside our agency. This is one of my favorite slides in terms of, like, the electric light did not come from the continuous improvement of candles. And this is like this notion of reimagining, like something completely different over here that's different than what we've been practicing over there. And the ability to reimagine is almost impossible without safety. And so we can't talk about reimagining, creating, innovating if we're not in an arena of safety within our organization. And so that keeps us in kind of survival brain. We're not able to think rationally. And you'll probably hear me say these same terms over and over the next couple slides. And so think about it, the organizational brain, right, it's the organization. And as the organization is dysregulated, it goes into survival brain. And our rational thinking is disrupted. When in stress, we regress. We go to what's safe. And some examples would be, whether or not to place children into foster care or into, placement away from their parents. That's kind of the safe way, right? And I think I've heard Amelia mention, like, it's the better safe than sorry, right? We have to start thinking about who's safe and who's sorry when we do that. And so when the organization is dysregulated, we have to, we're going to where it's safe. If we're regulated and the organization is calm and we're able to move forward, we're able to rationally think, critically think, slow down. Not everything is a crisis, and we can be creative and innovative. And so think about what we know about the brain and kind of how the way the neural pathways are designed or structured for survival. But we know that we can, make new neural pathways. It's the same thing for the agency. We're making new neural pathways in the agency, a new way of doing business, but it takes time and it takes repetition and it takes safety, trust, and connections. And I think this is one of my favorite infographics, and it just kind of further explains this kind of, I think Amelia uses this a lot. It's about, going from the old way to the new way. And when the new way and the old way kind of intersect there, what's called the messy middle, and you can see the squiggly line there. That's really, for me, that's like the dysregulated organizational brain. What are we doing here? And if you think about, it's so easy to go back to the old way where it was easy. That's easy to do in that messy middle, versus being grounded, rational thinking, be able to move through to the new way. And that's where the leadership piece comes in, that calm in the storm, that we've got this, I've got your back, we can take some risks, we can continue to move forward, we're on the right path. And where did that kind of lead, you know, for our leadership team? For our leadership team, when we had this arena of trust and we had this ability to, you know what each other was doing, we were able to lean in when we really wanted to run. That, you know, this comes from our team themselves, and it's like that's a huge piece. And behind the scenes, the collaborations that are going on between departments on our, you know, our organization, we're all on the same floor, like 130 staff, and the ability for managers to talk with each other, agent to talk to child welfare to talk to economic support, those things going on behind the scenes to help support a unified system at our agency on behalf of children and families. Demonstrating and addressing no daylight within the leadership team. And so we're one unified team moving forward, you know, through our innovation cohort projects and things like that. But really, it's that matter of trust and relationship and connectedness amongst the leadership team to move through, to be able to weather those storms and those waves of change that come in. And not settling for consensus, and really welcoming healthy conflict for buy-in. And then in that same vein, just focus on dissolving artificial harmony. We're like, yeah, that sounds good. And you leave the meeting and it really, you know, kind of that narrator over the top, like, and everything wasn't good, you know? And so trying to eliminate the artificial harmony and really kind of get at the core, continue to build trust, relationship, and connection amongst the team.
Hey, Chuck, as you're transitioning to this slide, I'm going to give you a couple of minutes just notice, and wanted to elevate a question that was put in the chat. How do you make a good regulated decision at 4 o'clock on a Friday when a placement is disrupting?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's the ability to just kind of like, let's breathe. We can work through this, instead of like, oh my God, really 4 o'clock and we're going to do this. I mean, there's two kinds of reactions to go through. It's not to say that it's not a crisis, but your reaction to that crisis, it'll help. It will affect the trajectory of how that decision is going to go, you know? And so if I'm like going to be as heightened or mad that it's 4 o'clock or freaked out that it's 4 o'clock, that's going to send our decision-making in a different place than, yep, this is just kind of what we're here for, and let's move through what do we need to do here. And I'm not trying to, you know, lighten the fact that that is a crisis, but I think it's also something that we can work through. And so the calm in the storm, right? And so some of our lessons learned through the whole process, whether it was the trauma-informed transformation that we had done as an agency that led into our involvement in the HUN system, is the fact that there will be naysayers. And I've got probably a 3-hour presentation on what that's all about. Leadership on the line. And I think that leads into this notion that the work is always going to be continuous and ongoing and always growing. There's not this place that you get to and say, here, we're here, and it's all good. And for us, the success was because we always kept trauma-informed care at the front end or at the front of our brains. We had folks like Aaliyah, you know, reminding us of that, or saying, well, is this trauma-informed or not? And that always at the front. And then a trauma-affected workforce is relational. It's built on trust. It comes without judgment or shame, or without blame or shame. There's professional transparency, you know, and communication is key. And this whole notion, I can't say it enough times today, is this notion of rhythm, predictability, patterning, safety, trust, connection. Those are the things that we're looking at building, because in those crisis pieces, it's, while we might not always be calm, we won't go as far as going to the old way and doing things how it's always been done. We need to be able to catch ourselves and move forward and continuing to push for a new way of doing the work. And I think, I'm hoping I stuck to my time limit, which would be amazing for any of those on the video or on the call that know me. So just thank you for this opportunity to spit out some concepts today. And, you know, for any of these pieces, be more than happy, willing to talk further and go a little bit further into the weeds with folks. Feel free to reach out to me through the contact info.
Chuck, that is so great. And I can see that Shannon's on here, and I bet she'll want to say a few things about that. Do you have something, Shannon?
I would imagine she does.
Thanks. I love the question, that I just really needed to chime into it. So the work, although we have the child welfare lens today, the work was applied across human services. And I remember the question made me think about this. We're doing some big changes within economic support, which use the call center model. And I had heard from the customer service aspect of a Starbucks actually was talking around what you're preparing the workforce and expectations for their day. So if you think about that and the unbelievable lines at Starbucks, like if the person making your coffee, the barista, turns around to see the next person and is like, are you serious? You want coffee too? And this person for coffee? And then you're all here for coffee. So then you can flip that over to economic support and the phone rings. And how do I internalize that phone call? That person that's reaching out with needs and asking for help. If I view that as an expectation of my day, that I have an opportunity to support somebody, is very different than when the phone rings, I'm interrupted and I'm bothered. And so when you keep that lens, you can build your structure around a way that sometimes 4 p.m. happens. But it isn't going to be a crisis. My response to it is not adding to the crisis, because I know that sometimes 4 p.m. and a decision will need to be made. And I have planned accordingly. I have proper supports around me. I have other people that can take the other things that I now can't do right now. And those types of things are how you build a structure.
Shannon, thank you so much. So Shannon Braden was the deputy director alongside Chuck in Wapaka County, so they know each other quite well. So hence her speaking in particular to that situation. So I want to introduce, we'll just make a brief transition and Chuck can stop sharing his screen, and then we will give the floor to Julia Jensen. We're so pleased to have you here. Julia is coming to us from Maryland. She is one of the out-of-home managers, child welfare program managers in Washington County at their Department of Social Services. So Julia had the unique experience of being at that manager level. And so we really wanted to have her come and talk about that specific role and the challenges and how she was able to address her own kind of well-being and the well-being of her team from that particular level. So Julia, I will toss it to you and then I'll keep at the chat.
Thank you very much. Hi, I'm Julia Jensen. As she said, I'm with Washington County in Maryland. And I really appreciated, Chuck, the things that you said, because it started to recall just what we're going through and that journey that I have been on in my role. So currently I'm the manager for our out-of-home unit, as well as our interagency family preservation unit and our trauma systems therapy unit, as well as our resource homes licensing and our visitation. So it hits a lot of the aspects of child welfare, and it's interesting to see in all those different areas how the thoughts and the experience that we've gone through Aaliyah, you can see it in the different components. And I was also in the unique position because when our agency joined the cohort with Aaliyah, I was one of the supervisors. And so I got to see it from a supervisor level first, and then moving into the manager role. And as a supervisor, I remember hearing about, we're doing this partnership with Aaliyah, and there's this unsystem, and thinking that there was going to be this major overhauling of our organization, and really being unsure of what that would look like and how it would feel. And then I do remember feeling a little bit of where are we going with that? Or what's happening now? And a little disjointed of the next steps. And I think it was really important when we started to hear more about it from management consistently and being involved in more of the process, that it started to sink into the supervisor level. And when you were talking about the importance of trust and the importance of safety, I think when Aaliyah came in, it helped kind of rock that in a way, in a good way though. It encouraged us to challenge one another, and it almost opened the door for somebody else encouraging questions and encouraging challenging thinking, and gave us that permission or authority to do that ourselves. I do remember the time that Katie and Amelia came out to Washington County and really sat down with all the director, ADs, supervisors, and some staff to ask us the why nots. Why not try it this way? Or what would it look like if you did look at it from this perspective? And it really gave us that opportunity to voice it almost to somebody else first before we had to voice it to our own administration and feel that safety being jeopardized there. So that was just an interesting benefit, I think, of having that outside perspective come in, because it allowed us that room to feel questioned and challenged, and then to also push back and advocate and do it on our own. And it welcomed that permission within our agency to do that. So I just, that stood out to me a lot when you were talking about trust and safety, because it kind of created more of that space for that. As my role shifted to being a manager and I got more directly involved in the process, it helped me understand more of the vision, where we're going and how we implement it. And I think the importance of making sure we started using that language on a daily basis, and then with our staff, really came through. The whole preserve and strengthening family connections is now just a natural part that we developed into our organization. We started using it in some of our interviews. We use it in our unit meetings and our team meetings. And so when we started hearing it more on all levels, I think it became more real and more effective throughout the agency. So when we're thinking about, workforce resilience, making sure that we are hitting it in different levels. Chuck, you talked a lot about from the leadership role, and then as a manager and supervisor role, if I wasn't hearing it or feeling it down in that level, I knew my workers weren't as well, and making sure that that was flowing through both directions. So I think what went well during our experience with Aaliyah was when we really started making the shift of making the old way harder. And I think you're going to talk about that in maybe future webinars, but that's really when we started getting that overall workforce shift, is making it harder to bring kids in care and really enforcing that keeping kids in their homes whenever it's safely possible. That also, though, is creating a different need for us to focus on our staff and their well-being, because the level of risk feels higher to them. That when they are making that shift of putting the energy into keeping the kids in their homes, they're sitting up later at night worrying about, is that kid safe now 24/7, whereas before they knew, or that felt safer when they were in a foster home. And so it helped us really need to focus on our staff's well-being as well, when we're advocating and encouraging kids to be safer in their homes whenever possible. And we should, it also made us think about, how's that playing into our staff and their well-being? One of the things that we decided to focus on, I don't know if it stemmed directly through our work with Aaliyah or not, was a safety protocol for our staff. So that when there was a critical incident or somebody had to experience something very intense on their caseload, we built in almost like a concussion protocol, a safety protocol around that too, knowing that that was extremely challenging for them, and the trauma that goes into then expecting them to be there the next day. And as you were saying, Shannon, answer another phone call thinking, is that going to be another case? It's going to be a very intense situation. So we really had to build in some specific mindful safety protocols for our staff in order to encourage them to continue to want to put in the work to keeping kids home whenever safely possible. It has drastically helped the ability to question and challenge and encourage, not getting in that, I forget how Chuck worded it, but that everybody agreeing mindset, right? Where it really encouraged more thinking, and that fostered a lot of questions and a lot of process. And the turnaround that we've seen has been tremendous. We have drastically decreased our amount of kids that we brought into care. I think we're at our current lowest ever. We have 95-ish kids in care right now, and we used to be in the hundreds. And that's just been tremendous. Some of the challenges though we face, and I think Chuck, you talked about a lot of the why it's important to have trust and safety throughout, is because the challenges that we have seen is when it functions around fear and liability. And some of those founding principles of ALEA too is the dare to share power. If you don't have that trust already established, daring to share power just does not come to the table. And we see a lot of our challenges when I feel like the higher you go within an organization, the more fear and liability tends to drive the work for right or wrong, that sometimes comes across. And you have to be able to trust in the staff that are out there in the field doing that work, that if they're coming to you saying, yes, this family has this protective factor, or an added grandma that will check on them daily, and a rep payee that will, help support the finances, you have to trust that they know what they're doing and that they will build in those supports around the family. Because if that's not there, that fear and liability factor of, well, what if this happens with that kid in that home, will start to creep in, and it really can impact the creative thinking. And for as much as we want to make the old way harder, we also don't want to make the new way harder. And I have heard staff say, it feels like sometimes we're still putting up barriers, go this new way, support the kid in their home, but we can't do this, we can't do this, we can't do that. So you can't have it both ways. You can't make the old way harder and the new way harder. And really having to find that balance and trust in supporting the new way, if that's where you're going to go.
Julia,
So
can I interrupt? There's a couple of questions in the chat about, can you talk a little bit about the protocol, the safety protocol framework that you mentioned?
So we had established a safety protocol around critical incidences, so that if there was a fatality, whether it was a child on your caseload, we unfortunately were having a lot of parent fatalities on our caseloads as well. So if there was a fatality or maybe a critical circumstance, that we immediately staff it, not in a judgmental way, but the focus is, what do you need as that worker? Trying to make sure we're also pulling them out of rotation so that they are not the next one to get a case, but intentionally thinking they need space for that. Pairing them with a buddy so that maybe that buddy can't attend to that specific crisis, but you still have 10 other cases that need attention to. So could that buddy help with phone calls on another case, or going out on one of your doing an immediate physical, so that you have a team of support. And then we planned that out. So there was some immediate, and then there's a follow-up when we teamed with a workforce trauma organization that we can do either one-on-one counseling sessions with, or just a general debriefing about that situation. Our staff have used that several times. And then again, and then a final follow-up. So now we're 30 or 60 days out and just looking back, what would you have needed differently, or could we have done anything better to support? So it's not so much about the case, but the worker and what they needed. That's what we have started to implement in our organization.
That's terrific. Julia, I'll just give you maybe another few seconds, or if you had a few other things to mention, and then we will toss it to Tanya. I know we could do an hour on every section here, but
one other piece, and then yes, I will happily, is just that hitting it from all levels, because I do feel like you need that trust from top to bottom. And so whether it's you have kind of some identified change agents that going into a meeting will be willing to ask the challenging questions, or will be willing to encourage that other thinking, or pairing up with somebody that you do feel safe and trust with to support each other in being able to elevate concerns or needs. I think that is important to support their well-being too. Knowing that they have someone on their level willing to go to bat along with them, and then knowing that they have the support along the way to engage in those challenging discussions.
Awesome.
So thank you so much for the opportunity to share that. And I really appreciated all the things that Chuck said. It just really resonated with the experience that I had.
Julia, thank you so much. We will now hear from ALEA's own Tanya Anderson. We're so glad to have you. Tanya is a Senior Director of Learning at ALEA and will share with us well-being and resilience in the context of culture.
Hello, everyone. Can you see that as a single
can.
slide? All right, perfect. Thanks for the intro, Katie. It's really nice to join you all and piggyback on everything that Chuck and Julia shared today. I'm going to dive right in and get to it since we only have 15 minutes in a conversation that could go really wide, probably week after week for 6 months in engagement. So I'm going to start by talking about what we mean by cultural well-being. You know, building off of Chuck's visual of that lighthouse up north, we're going to talk about how we can create the calm in the storm in our organizations. So I think we would all agree that during our recent times here, especially during COVID, wellness and well-being has really been out front. How to take care of ourselves with all of these stressors that surround us. So we have advertisements that are reminders everywhere, podcasts, books, people checking in with us about, you know, doing the thing, whether it's practices like drinking green smoothies or meditating or exercising, and investing in meaningful relationships. We all have a notion of what well-being means to some degree. I think that as we pulled together the idea for this 15-minute kind of preview into this topic, Team Aaliyah was really talking about and thinking about cultural well-being as the norms for how we interact with others in a space where everyone can thrive. Thrive is a really big word that can have many different meanings. So we're going to talk a little bit about some concrete things that might attach to what thriving means in your places and spaces. So I'm going to keep this at the cultural well-being 101 level, and then give some examples of ways in which folks are marginalized and examples of what we can do to support more culturally equitable ways of being. So the definition of culture is a defined group's assumptions and norms for how people interact and approach what they do. You know, each one of us has our own culture. Every space has a culture, and culture is what really, and values are what drive our behavior. Values and expectations show up in how we do things and how we see. So when we're talking about cultural being or ways of being in the workplace, we can't do that without talking about identity and race. Recognizing how people are seen and not seen can help open up conversations and awareness and make connections with how we each show up and contribute to the cultures that we create together. Social and personal identities are critical because they're a make it or a break it in how we get integrated or excluded, and how we're seen or how we're not seen. So personal identities are what make us unique, right? This is, there are a few examples of this on the right hand of the slide. They're elements that help us get to know each other as individuals. And these are the important elements that really meaningful relationships are built on. It's who I am as a person, what makes me unique. We also have social identities, and some examples are listed on the left side. And these categories are examples of how we group ourselves, how we group others, and how we get grouped. Those categories on the left are often hierarchical, and so within groups, some are on top and some are on the bottom. These are identity markers that we can't control. So they're typically based on how people perceive us. So race and ethnicity is highlighted here because, as you know, Aaliyah is focused on anti-racism work. And so this is going to be the lens through which I talk today. In our society, white skin comes with inherent advantages and privileges and dominant cultural norms and ways of being that really creates identity, power, and advantage. So When we have more dominant social identities, for example, being white or educated or male, these identities don't always get named out front because we don't typically have to think about them as much as if marginal identities are in the picture. So we oftentimes think of marginalized identities first because that's how marginalized folks are seen. So you may have inadvertently, unconsciously seen me and thought, oh, Asian woman, because social identities are typically based on appearances alone. So why does this matter? If we're not having conversations about the impact of race and ethnicity as a social identity, we're missing big parts of ourselves and what differentiates our lived experiences. So we know there are disparate outcomes for children and families based solely on the color of their skin. And the larger, more important conversation that we won't tackle today is really about the impact of social identities for race and ethnicity that drive real significant outcomes over time, like life expectancy or access to healthcare, education, or wealth and income. So race-based differences also show up in the workplace and in how we are seen and what we experience. So we all know the research where job applicants with Black sounding names are less likely to get job interviews. What about some innocuous activity, like an icebreaker activity? I worked with an organization where they wanted folks to bring in a baby picture, and they were going to play a guessing game when they were together, guessing who is whom, as lighthearted thing. This works really well in a racially homogeneous group, and not so well in a mixed group. So we don't know about that though, until you're on the outside of that. So we're going to get more specific and talk about other ways that racial marginalization shows up day to day. Social marginalization is real, and we can use microaggressions. Sorry about that. We can use microaggressions as an example of this. So microaggressions are really about identity, assumptions, and stereotypes. Just really quickly off the top, microaggressions, the definition is brief and commonplace daily verbal, behavioral, and environmental indignities, whether intentional or unintentional, that communicate hostile, derogatory, or negative slights and insults to marginalized groups and individuals. So some common racial microaggressions are shown here on the left, just as examples to give context. And when a microaggression happens, it's kind of like having a target on your forehead that says, hey, this is your identity and this is how I see you. For example, a coworker may say to a Muslim coworker, oh, you don't speak Arabic? And the Muslim coworker might respond by saying, no, I don't speak Arabic. There's an assumption there that has to be explained that might not show up for somebody else. There are macro impacts for these occurrences, and a few examples of those are listed on the right side of the slide. So when these happen over and over again, it may have, it takes a toll. It may make a person challenge or question their own self-worth or self-concept. A BIPOC identifying individual may wonder, well, was I hired for a diversity quota, or am I actually qualified, as an example? The cumulative effect of these macro impacts is like raindrops tapping repeatedly on your hand day after day. So that little raindrop, a few raindrops are painless, they're a nuisance. You'll notice them. But if those raindrops happen every day over and over, it becomes a pain point, right? You can't shrug it off. And that's the long-term effect of microaggressions in the macro impacts, how they show up. You'd be sore and bruised over time with that little but continuous raindrop. So building bridges and foundations of trust with marginalized staff is critical in this well-being conversation. And this moves us from that survival brain to safety in our day-to-day practices and interactions. So the hard thing is that people do not always know how to talk about these pain points, and they may not even recognize it when they happen. So we as adults are making a huge shift. I want to recognize this and acknowledge the truth in this. We're creating new practices and awarenesses. We're shifting away from norms that were prevalent in our, I will say, my formative years, like colorblindness and minimizing. And we are moving into a space where we're waking the sleeping giant. I am in St. Paul, and as you know, we've had many historical events in every city all over the world, but most specifically, we've had public racially motivated events that have woken that sleeping giant here. So we can no longer be silent about those racial pain points and who's benefiting based on skin tone alone and who's not. Cultural wellness is a practice and a way of being and doing that nurtures the whole self. It's inclusive of all people and commits to trying things that may not be comfortable, but its intention is to benefit the whole that we are a part of. So do we look forward to cardio workouts every day, every time? No way. But we likely feel better after we do it. So we want to move from knowing those cardio workouts and those wellness elements are good for us to experiential application of that knowledge and doing something about it. So it's the intersection of bringing unity and understanding and respect for each other into action. So how do we do that? In this space, everyone here is really familiar with some norms that make a family healthy. Chuck talked a lot about this, rules, clear structures, deep, trusting relationships, love, a sense of belonging and trust. These are some markers of family wellness, and organizations are no different. We need at the organizational level, we need similar kinds of ground rules and structures and trusting relationships. So I think what was mentioned first by Chuck was, these rhythms and predictability and a need for safety that leads to trust and connectedness. So we can build the foundation for cultural well-being by creating norms and ways of being at work that are centered in people and infrastructure. What could this look like? We would invest in people in those relationships, like learning about your work culture by asking questions during supervision or in a workplace survey to gauge if staff feel like they can show up as their true selves at work, and make necessary changes to strengthen and improve that based on what you hear. Invest in developing supervisors' skill sets so they're equipped to listen and hold diverse perspectives and experiences. When there's perceived conflict, ask yourself some reflective questions like, what am I feeling? Is this my narrative focusing on my ego and self-importance? If the answer is yes, how might I tend to that to be more present and think about it in a different way from a different perspective? And can I commit to listening openly in the future? So structures create guideposts for safety and what and how we do things. So creating and training to policies and processes that make it clear what the organization values and how we're accountable, like no retaliation policy or defined roles and responsibilities, clear organizational processes, assessing who's at the table for decision making are just a few examples. Facilitating meaningful conversations and team trust building. Another example is everyday words or actions that communicate validation of a person's lived reality and reassures them that they're not alone. This enhances that psychological well-being. And one way to enhance this is also responding directly to disarm or counteract the effects of microaggressions. So we can build practices and behaviors by calling people in instead of shaming and calling out, right? We want to work through this together. And some think that calling out is like a cancel culture approach. You've probably heard this, that signals virtue and wrongdoing rather than achieving a real change goal. So calling in acknowledges an experience and aligns on values, and it builds that psychological safety and creates the neural pathways and how we move from the old to the new together. So if people of marginalized groups decide to call others in on a microaggression, they kind of risk their own physical or mental safety. But if nobody says anything, if they don't say anything, perpetrators may not change, and they may not even know what happened. They might not have that awareness. So things to consider is, think about how folks in leadership positions can model and interrupt, notice, name, reject, listen, and respond to staff when they come forward with microaggressions. Think about how positional power works anywhere in any organization, and where people can show up as their true selves. So we have an opportunity to role model the appropriate responses and empower people not to be silent, to call people in ways that help each other grow and learn. Because when we're silent, it makes people question if that thing really happened or if it matters.
Tanya, I'm gonna, if I could just have this slide be on the screen. We are a few minutes over, and I appreciate everyone asking questions throughout. And just wanted to say, as Anna put in the chat, you are dismissed, and we are happy to stay on if you have more questions. We get that workforce well-being and well-being itself may not be the sexiest topic, although you hopefully heard the thread throughout that it is so reliant and dependent on trust and safety and connection and regulation and honesty, and that is something that just happens over time. So I so appreciate Tanya and Julia and Chuck joining us today, and not even for their time today, but all the time and experiences that went into having something to share for today. So I just offer a huge thank you, and thank you for bringing us home, Tanya, in this idea around calling in and how that is again connected to trust and safety and being able to do our best work in our system. So we will stick around for a moment, and I'm happy to chat. We'll send out the recording. Please go to aliainnovations.org for other resources and to sign up for our newsletter. There are 3 more webinars in this series, so we hope to see you there as well. And please take care of yourself and focus on your own well-being during this challenging and joyful, hopefully, holiday season.